Hey everyone. So welcome to yet another live stream from N8N. And today we are going to be chatting about unifying customer data with no-code dashboards. So today I have with me two special guests. So first of all, I have Omar. Hey Omar. And if
Hey,
you've
Tanay.
seen the previous live streams from N8N, you might recognize him. And then we have Max. So Max is head of
Hey,
design
Tanay.
at N8N, and yeah, and Omar and Max have been working on some pretty cool stuff. So today we are going to be chatting about that. Before we get started, Omar, would you like to tell us a bit about what you've been working on recently?
Sure, definitely. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here again. It's, I believe, my third live stream of tonight, showcasing some of the things that we've been doing on N8N. Lately, we have been working on some very important improvements for N8N. So, for example, the adding of loggings to N8N. So N8N will have a much clearer interface and debugging tools that are very useful. We've made a few improvements to the scaling process of N8N as well recently. So N8N is much more robust recently. And there are some very good things upcoming too in the next weeks as well. So this is some news from the engineering side.
Awesome. And Max, what have you been working on recently?
So there's a lot of exciting features that are in the pipeline right now. I would say what's sort of getting ready to be deployed soon, hopefully, is workflow tagging. So right now, if you have a lot of workflows, it's not so easy to maybe manage those and organize those. So we're going to be deploying that. That's going to be really helpful for power users. The nodes panel is also getting a revamp. That's in progress right now. The designs have been done. So we're bringing categorization to the nodes so you can discover and find nodes more easily. That's also coming with some preferences in the node panel, which I'm really excited about. So if you're a power user, you're going to be able to start customizing that experience. And then for new users, we're going to be able to optimize that to make it easier to onboard to N8N. Beyond that, we've had David, our new head of design, join. So working with him on sort of shaping the product and what we're going to be doing over the next couple of months. And then the big feature we're working on right now, sort of the research phase, is user management. So very excited for that. It's going to allow teams and organizations to collaborate together and basically bring N8N into their organizations. So yeah, really excited about that.
Awesome. Really a lot of cool stuff going on. Cool. So by the way, gentlemen, nice t-shirt.
Oh,
Likewise, Tane. Likewise.
loved it.
I think we might have to. I think we shop at the same place.
Oh yeah, maybe today's live stream is sponsored, perhaps. I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm really
So
hoping to get a sponsorship deal from this one, right?
Oh yeah,
it's funny because we actually all got this t-shirt during the first Hackmation. So we've been chatting a bit about this in the previous live streams. So, in case you haven't attended those, we do these things quarterly. We call them Hackmation. And these are essentially hackathon for automations. And we work on different stuff. We either automate an internal process or try to build a completely new product using N8N. And I think what we are showcasing today came through as a result of the first Hackmation 0.1, right?
That's right.
exactly.
So what are we gonna take a look at today, Max?
Sure. So today we're going to be taking a look at a dashboard that Omar and I jammed on the first Hackmation. So again, Hackmation, it's a one-day hackathon, right? So you kind of got to choose something that is manageable to be able to knock out in a day. And what we focused on was this issue that I think speaks to a lot of product teams and really anyone working on a product is there's all these SaaS apps that you might use because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? There's a lot of value that you can get from them. But as you're building out a product rapidly, you start identifying all these various silos of data and information. And so what we found was that for customer support and also for product, it would sometimes be rather inefficient to go find the full picture on a customer. So this happened in a few different ways. But ultimately, what we decided was let's use N8N. Let's find a good tool to present that data and just be able to build our own dashboard. So the whole goal was to build a dashboard, deploy something in one day, but then have this vehicle where we can, as needed, add a little piece here or there, or even for, let's say a colleague joins, they need to tweak that dashboard, they can duplicate it, do whatever they need to. and really be empowered to just go do that. So what I can do is actually show, we have a few slides prepared and sort of what the problem was and how we approached to solve it.
Shall we add it to the stream then?
Please.
Awesome.
Right. So yeah, so this is Unifying Customer Data with N8N and Retool, which is an amazing tool if you're looking to build internal dashboards. We'll talk a lot more about it in a second. But really what this started out with was, I need a dashboard today to solve my problem, right? That was the real genesis of all this. So the problem that we had, and I think this really is something when I speak to a lot of peers in the product space, is something a lot of teams suffer from, was the concept of siloed data. But like, what does that really mean, right? So specific problems that we would find is that our application database was a black box for the product team. So I think a scenario that most product managers would think is really bad is, you've got your developer, they're focused, they're working on a very important problem, and you ping them and you say, hey, can you check the database and tell me what user 123, what's their email? That's not necessarily very strategic work that you're asking someone to context switch for. And then one of the other issues was that as a constraint of a lot of these different systems used, they sometimes have different unique identifiers. So for example, Amplitude might have the Amplitude ID is the identifier in our database. That was just the ID that gets incremented. And very often for customer support especially, you would only have one or two identifiers. It might be a bit of a better scenario if they submitted through a formal channel, but very often you might get something coming in through Twitter or just through an email, and you might only have their name. And I think having a person's name was definitely one of the hardest cases, because that definitely isn't a unique identifier in any system, right? You can have a unique ID of some kind. So the problem really was, at first, of any identifier I have, how can I search the whole system, all the different systems, to just find that person? And then that was the main goal. And then what we realized is the inefficiency that stemmed from that, once you found that person, is having to log into 4 different systems. They all have different search patterns, and then doing a query, doing a lookup to get to that individual user view. That's usually the detailed view, the details view, right, where all that information is that you might need. And for any single time, that might only be a minute, maybe if something's being slow, 2 minutes, but that all adds up, right, when you have to do 10, 20 of these things a day. So the goal here was to reduce all that inefficiency, and as a sort of a big point, to not impact engineering at all for this sorts of stuff, so they can focus on all the things that Omar was discussing, right? So to kind of frame this problem, I took a look at some of these destinations that we're using. So for example, we're using Amplitude for analytics, and that has its unique identifiers, Amplitude ID. We're also using Customer.io for emails, and so they're using the identifier that we use in our database. And then in Paddle, which is our payment provider, they are using a subscription ID, completely separate sort of ID that's linked to a user. And then in Postgres, so what we're using, and the N8N Cloud application itself was also a database ID. So ultimately, the goal was, right, how do we unify all these 4 things, and in future, as things come, how do we bring that into the fold? So the solution ultimately ended up being a combination of N8N and Retool. And it was really simple when we really broke it down at the end of the day. I think one thing that we really liked with Omar when we were working on this is we had a very simple spec at first. The goal was really a search bar to be able to type in, identify, and find a user. We said, if we get that done in one day, we're happy, this big pain point solved. Very quickly, I think we got that solved in like 90 minutes, something like that. It was very early in the day. I don't think we even had my second coffee yet. So then from there, we just kept going. And so we were able to create this kind of detailed view for each user. So you find the user and you can open up this detailed view. And the goal there was, most of the time, there might only be some basic information you want to get. So it doesn't make sense to open up that detailed view, go digging around in Amplitude or something. So we're able to do that. And by working with URL parameters, we're able to open up that detailed view when you need it. So one of the things we decided early on is let's not try and rebuild Amplitude. Let's not try and rebuild Customer IO. If there's a transactional email related problem, you're probably going to want to go into Customer IO, use that native app, and use the power that it has there to go solve that problem or go find that information. So it was a bit of a balancing act, but I think we found a pretty nice way to go about it. And then at a very high level, before we sort of show all the moving pieces and how we did it, just thought this might be a useful diagram here. So how we approached it is we had Retool on the front end. We saw that Retool's really good with the UI components they have. They're very quick to be able to manipulate those, get a view together, and still have rather good UX. And then we used N8N as the backend. So Retool is essentially consuming all these API endpoints that are being furnished by N8N. And then N8N in this way is sort of this API wrapper, or this gateway to all these destinations that we have in our ecosystem that contain customer data, that might have GDPR considerations, that we don't just want to expose. So I think the really nice thing about N8N here was that in a sort of a hackathon scenario, you're moving quickly. Security might not always be top of mind. We're able to make a few decisions early on within N8N that prevented us from ever being able to expose anything. So we were able to sort of be creative, try things out, and know that we weren't causing any issues. And there was a few, I think, key principles here that we did. For example, when we were creating credentials in N8N to access all these apps, we created minimum credentials necessary. So I think one of the tenets here we said was everything's going to be read-only for this V1 version, because as soon as we start manipulating the production database, I'm sure everyone on the engineering team would appreciate that we validate that, check that, have things peer-reviewed and whatnot, right? So we made a few decisions like that really opened us for us to be able to work with production data, get useful insights, but make sure that security, of course, and customer data is top of mind. So that's kind of the model that we followed here.
I think that was a very good experience because, as Max mentioned, security is something important, and me as an engineer, we might be hacking, but still, the security considerations are always important. And using N8N to centralize all credentials, allowing us to access data, and not just the security thing, but being able to really iterate fast, because we wanted to get information from multiple sources and maybe merge data. So we had to look up information from multiple sources so we can get a detailed and single consolidate, a single point of truth for all information about it, any of the users based on some information from them. So this is very good accomplishments that we did using Retool and N8N.
Absolutely. And I think if I think about what really allowed us to do this efficiently and why this was exciting, right? Because at the end of the day, you put a day in, what do you get out of it? That's kind of the function, was that we chose the right tool for the job. So I was focused mostly in Retool, doing the UI side, building all that out. And Omar was mostly focused in N8N, building out the workflows that I'll consume in Retool. And what was nice about that is that we didn't have to coordinate so much. Really, what we would do is for each view, we would decide what the view is. And we would essentially, before we started, I think all we agreed upon was the JSON object that I was going to get from the API call. So then I could start using placeholders, expect that I'll have this data. I know I'm going to have a customer ID. I know it's an ID. I know I'm going to have this value. It's a string. And so we made that kind of reference object in a few minutes. And then we were able to, we're all remote right now. We're able to plug in, do what we need to do, and every 20, 30 minutes or something like that, have another sync, do a test or tweak it. I think that model obviously changed as we were getting into it, but that really was the key for success there. It's just agreeing on that, because then we're completely decoupled and could do our thing. But so that's how we went about it. I think it might be helpful to contextualize and actually show the Retool app here. So I can do that now.
And while you're sharing your screen, I'm curious, Max, you come from a product background, and Omar, you come from an engineering background. Without Retool and N8N to feed data into it, how big of a project would this be otherwise?
Wow. Omar, would you like to comment on the engineering side? I can try and give an estimate on the product side.
Yeah, let's start from the basics. I'd have to build a sort of backend and connect to all of these services. So I'd have to get the credentials, maybe a sandbox account for each of the services. But let's say that we already have this. So I'd have to start consuming their APIs one by one and understanding how data structures work for each of those services. After understanding each service paradigm, I would then start building connectors for all of these. Then I would naturally have to think about how can I add more services in the future. So maybe creating some useful interfaces for consuming this data. And so developing all of this backend would probably take, like, let's say hacky way, a week, possibly, just to get something cool. Maybe, just horrible code, maybe in a day, but it would probably take me the whole day, to just getting the bare parts working. So in order to have like a product that Max could use daily, it would probably take me 1 or 2 weeks. And the amazing thing was that it was already usable like 2 hours after we started,
I think, and then on the product side, I think the scope of what I would have done if we were doing this from scratch, it wouldn't have taken as long as Omar, for example. But I think the key part here is, I likely wouldn't have built it from scratch anyways. We would have used some sort of component-based system. But at the end of the day, I think is the decisions I would have had to make, knowing it's an internal tool, knowing that thousands of users aren't going to use this, the end product would have just been, I think, far worse, because I would have had to constrain my design decisions. What's great about Retool is the components that they have, like this table that you're seeing right now, is a really usable table that's really well thought out in the functionality. I mean, you're looking at it right now, it doesn't seem like there's that much, but these 3 little buttons here do so much. I mean, we'll get into that in a second. So I think the biggest benefit there, the time saver, is that I can get the quality that I would get in a custom built tool that I'm shipping to thousands of users, and be able to apply that to a 1-person or a 3-person user use case, where you could never have justified that amount of time. So I think that's really the benefit there in product. I think another big aspect too, because it's drag and drop, we were able to mock things up so quickly. I think like some of these views we did in 5 minutes. Just, okay, that looks great, and maybe in future we'll make them more beautiful. But we really haven't done that beautifying step because it hasn't been necessary. Just so far, we've just been increasing its functionality because the default tools that, or the components that Retool has, really great out the box. So yeah, I really recommend it if you're looking at having broad coverage. I think we use maybe 5% of the available components that they have. So this is a great example of that, maybe like a tangible one, is so this is the dashboard view, right? So this is where we're listing all the various users that are on n8n Cloud. And then the idea was in future, we might have other tabs for sort of different contexts. So this we didn't get to. I think this happened. This was at Hackmation. At the end of the day, we have a presentation. We started making this view 10 minutes before the presentation, and we were really trying, and we wanted to get it done. And I guess 10 minutes isn't enough time if you're looking for where the time limit is. That might not be enough time. But we were able to start concepting where this will go within 10 minutes, right? But when I look at this list component here, how we envisioned it at first was that there might be some UI components above it for searching by username, searching by email, etc. But after getting the list view going, we first said, let's get the data in the list first. We realized, because this was the first time either of us had used Retool, that there's this add filters here, this button. If I click on it, it automatically allows you to filter by any of the parameters or any of the columns that you're loading in here. So it's very easy to start doing something like this. That's exactly the functionality that we wanted. So we didn't have to do anything else out of the box. It was actually a beautiful surprise. And there's going to be a lot of little things like that basically happened throughout this Retool experience where we thought we'd have to build something else. It's like, oh, that's already been thought of, which was great. So I think that's another key component when you're thinking about building for internal tooling, is that you're not going to have to onboard 10,000 users to this. So if I was designing for a B2C product, and the goal of this view is to, like we said from the start, right, was to be able to find a user by any identifier. This probably would not be a great pattern because it's really hidden, right? In an ideal world, if they're the primary actions, they're a lot bigger, they're at the top, there's all these sorts of things. But because the intention was for me to use it and maybe one or two other colleagues, we knew that we could create a Loom video to teach them or get on a quick screen share, onboard them to this view. And then once they know that, there's never really been any usability issues with clicking that guy there and selecting whatever we need to select and using all these great filtering parameters here. So I guess what we can do is show how we might use the tool in a sort of given day-to-day, and then maybe do a little breakdown of how we built it. How's that sound?
Amazing.
Great.
Sure.
So what might happen in any given day, right, is a user reaches out, and it'll be sort of a customer support thing, or perhaps we're taking a look for product, we're identifying, user XYZ has an interesting case here that we want to get a handle on, understand their experience. So we might have a specific identifier. Now, first off, the data you're seeing here, this is staging data. These are not our live production users. So in this case, let's say one of my colleagues, David, I wanted to look up his instance and see if there's any issues or his usage and how he's getting activated during his trial, right? So I might not have his email or his user ID or his username, definitely not when he created the account. There's a few ways I could do that, right? We can very quickly sort by when he created it. Maybe we know that he created it recently and there he is. Or that's very often the case, we might just have his name, right? And so if we start typing in David, very quickly, there's just one instance here, and then we can go to details. And so what go to details does, this is now loading in through a few different end-to-end workflows, the various data for this individual view. So I think the first thing to point out here, I collapse this, is how we connected this view with the previous view is really just with URL parameters. So what's happening is, in this view here, if I go find that name again, is when I click this go to details button, it's very simple to set up in Retool, is it opens, or for each row, this button opens a URL, and we had a static part of the URL, and then we just appended as a URL parameter this user ID here. So when I click on that, we can see basically the URL was just this static URL here, and then just appending this user ID. So it's a very simple way to communicate between the views and not have to think of any sort of complexity there. And then what happened is that ID gets sent to all these end-to-end workflows that then return all the different data to populate this view. So on the left-hand side here, we basically have the data that came from the table. So it's top left, and then a few actions. So these actions, the idea here is it's really just a laundry list of the things that we need to do most, right? So if we need to reach out to the user, we might want to open their view in Zendesk, and we could do that. And now from here, we can create a ticket or see existing tickets for him. We see he's got a question regarding his workflow. Might want to get back to him on that. And for example, we're using Grafana for monitoring the different instances. If I click this now, it's not going to load an actual instance because we have to switch from a production environment here. But here we would see all the sort of various instance metrics there, which is very good for troubleshooting in certain scenarios. And then the plan is to also have further actions, which currently engineering might be doing, but that we want to create an API endpoint through n8n that then a tool like Retool could consume so that we don't have to impact engineering. So things like in a free trial, if someone accidentally is running the cron trigger and eats up all their executions, we might want to reset that. Right now, that would impact engineering and might take 30 minutes. That time really adds up, right? And there's a dollar value associated to that. So from when that endpoint's ready, we'll be able to just click that button, but still have this secured and authenticated. Same thing for other sorts of actions like that. What's nice with Retool is we can add these in, and it's very quick to set up if if that's going to be active, hidden, that sort of thing. It has a lot of intelligent modes for that sort of thing. Now,
I think, I'm sorry. I think a lot of added value that we have in this is that the list of things that we can do is really easy to extend, because you simply add a new button, you call another endpoint, you interact with other systems, and that's so easy to add. And that's a lot because Retool is so easy to create stuff. You can simply drag and drop buttons and create URLs that you want to call external services. Like this one in Zendesk is really so easy to set up and get to start working, and also creating all those side panels that we added to get a single source of truth about all the information from a user. That was, I'm just asking you, like, try to imagine having to find all of this information on separate systems. So like opening multiple tabs and trying, okay, so in here I have to search using his email. And for this tool, I have to use the, I don't know, instance ID or something like that, you know. So getting all this information together is really powerful.
Absolutely. And I think it's that time saver, because when you have a very important task, you're saying, I'm going to sit down and work on it for 4 hours, no problem. But it's when a 2-minute task turns into a 15-minute task, and that happens 20 times a week, is where you realize we've lost 20% of a week or something, right, through that. And I don't think I've ever met a product owner that says I have ample time to be finding a user in a specific system. I think another thing that was really helpful is that we modularized a lot of this, right? And I think a good example of this right now, you're seeing for this pedal data, nothing's populating. This is because we're using the sandbox environment right now, because we didn't want to use the production data. But what's nice about this is this module here is still working. Amplitude data is still getting pulled in, as is this customer IO one, because those are all separate workflows. So if we go into an edit mode here, we're going to see that this get paddle data one here will fail, but the others won't. So if you are building these out, I do recommend to not have sort of these monolithic workflows, because that way if something does go down, you can still get all that other value out of it. So to quickly run through this, because we've explained this little guy here, but so for paddle, the idea was there's a few key points of data that we want to have in this view, and then anything else we want to open that in paddle. So what's happening here, if I click on this link, what we might have is, which I think is typical in most SaaSes, is a static URL, something like mysaasapp.com/users, and then you would have the user ID, right? So we essentially piggybacked off of all of these predictable URLs to have all these sorts of open the detailed view, which I've been finding in a lot of my workflow automations, especially for Slack and Mattermost type automations. It's a really nice pattern, because very often in your workflow, if you're interacting with these APIs, you're getting back some kind of identifier, be it an ID or something. And so it's usually very trivial to go take a look at, open that app, see the view that you want, and identify, oh, okay, that's where they're putting the user ID or some sort of filtering parameters. That's how we also have workflows if you want to pre-populate Gmail, compose fields. You can really do a lot with those. So similar case here for Amplitude, we've got a handful of things that might be important for us now. We've got some recent events, but this events view is a lot more intuitive in Amplitude if we need to go explore and identify an issue. So in this case, we might open that user up in Amplitude. We see here, we've got the Amplitude ID, and this is the project, and this is the static part of the URL. And now we've got access to this user and all the sorts of the deep data that we might need 20% of the time, right? So we're not rebuilding it. And then as we were going along, we realized, for example, in customer IO, that there's not a lot of important information that we need in this view. It's essentially, if there's a problem with a transactional email or something, we're going to need to just go into customer IO. So in terms of scope, we said, great, we've got a section for customer IO, and then we can just open that. So sort of the same thing here. We're seeing there's a person, we had injected the ID there, I guess under the hood, they just switched it out there, and now we can access this detailed view, right? So I would say, if you're thinking about internal dashboards, really do take a look at your apps, do take a look at the URL routes, and see how you can piggyback off of those to not reinvent the wheel.
Definitely. And I can certainly see this being used in the future for more people from the customer success team that we have onboarded, because this is really powerful, and we'll be adding more and more features. So, for example, Max mentioned a few of those situations that we can use, like reset executions count, for example, for a user that is trialing, maybe extend the trial duration for a user. All of these situations that might require interacting with engineers and getting someone switch context to work on something like this. All of these repeatable tasks that you might think, okay, it doesn't take much time, but it adds up. And not just adding up, having a developer switch context from something he's doing. So, okay, he will just stop coding, open I don't know, maybe a database editor, connect to the database, find the user, interact with something, change some data, ping that back to you. So it takes a lot of time. And especially when you have many customer success agents, you have a lot of people querying for this information constantly, So there's a lot of time waste here. And the cool thing, we put this in one day, So it doesn't take a long time to develop something like this, and also to extend this. So this is really valuable.
Absolutely, and I think it's that extendability that's really powerful there. For example, when we do onboard more customer success individuals, what they need out of a dashboard might overlap a lot with a customer support role, but it might be slightly different. It's very trivial to duplicate that, make a tweak. If we need to duplicate the workflow, potentially, that's also very, very quick to do, right? So I completely agree with Omar there, and I think with my product management hat on, one of the worst things is having a skilled developer that's really talented and can do all these amazing things doing an SQL query lookup, right? Like, you do not want that happening.
A side benefit that we had, for this presentation, we're showing you data from staging environment, and this was so easy to do as well, because all we needed to do, currently only Max is using it, so we wouldn't be doing the same in a production environment, for example, but we just switch credentials in NA10, and voila, we're now running on staging, So once we finish, we can just simply switch back. So testing and iterating over this process is really easy. And using Retool, we can maybe duplicate this panel, create a side copy so we can iterate and work on, maintaining the main one working. So this level of flexibility that you have is really great for this process when you're iterating over and improving this and adding more functionality.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the future, I see a comment come in. So we have a question which asks, what is the future of the Cloud Admin app? Will you be adding new tools or services to the dashboard?
Absolutely. So I think that there's a lot of ideas, and I would love for some of these ideas to be coming from some of the customer success, colleagues we're looking to hire. But for me personally, I think it's all about modeling these tabs around sort of high-level jobs to be done. So the users explorer is when you're trying to drill down and find a single person, right? One thing when I was looking at user activation, so this is a very important consideration when you're looking at users who are trialing, right? They don't know the tool, they've joined, you have your 30 days basically to turn them into an advocate, to show them, hey, end-to-end can solve your problem. Some users need a bit more assistance than others, some use cases are a bit more complicated, right? So that's sort of the idea behind this activation hub. And what I was looking for when we're concepting something like an activation hub is, I think sales tools have some really nice patterns for how to think about a free trial pipeline. In a sales process, you have deal stages, right? Deals set out and whatnot, and they visualize them as funnels. I couldn't find as many great examples of that concept in terms of product user activation. With something like Retool, we can take a pattern from sales. We can take a pattern from somewhere else that's nothing to do with how perhaps popular product tools think about these things, and we can just build that out. So in this one, this is obviously sort of in progress, but the idea would be is, if we have a 30-day trial, there's 4 weeks, we can see the number of users in these different points, and perhaps from here we could be highlighting, that there's 8 users at risk. Maybe they haven't set up a credential. It's probably a good idea to reach out check out why, or take a look at the usage and see if there's maybe a specific type of credential that they're trying to add, and we can maybe then for product understand, that type of credential is a bit difficult to add. Let's create a video, let's create a tooltip flow or something like that. And so really the way I see this growing would be in terms of these tabs here. So perhaps there'll be one for success, for support, and then really from there, I think it's all about how we'll drill down, how we'll improve the various things you can do in the detailed view. So since it was a V1, we focused a lot on read-only stuff. This is probably something we won't want to hack together in an hour, but things like resetting their execution count and all these various sorts of actions. Speaking as someone who has to make sometimes the tough choices about, do we work on ticket A or ticket B? I could absolutely justify, if this reset executions count endpoint is non-trivial. Let's say it takes 3 full days to implement. I would absolutely go for that in a heartbeat, because that's much better than 30 minutes maybe best case scenario to do it manually, to sometimes 2 hours, or even the possibility of human risk when you're modifying a user's instance manually. That's amazing. And then the retail implementation side would just be minutes, right? So that's really where I see it going, is there's not so much a roadmap, but really identifying week on week, this thing we did 5 times manually, now we're doing it, we're charting the course to do it automatically. And I think that's really how we'll go about it, is just keeping account of how many times we did something. Because if it's once every 2 months and it's half an hour, maybe it doesn't make sense to spend that time, right? But as soon as we do it a couple times in a week, I think that's a great candidate to put on the board, prioritize it, and then get that as a functionality that we can consume in our panel here.
Cool, very cool. And then I see another question which asks, were there nodes available for all the services in NA10 already? And I see Jay Hawkins has +1 this question.
So not exactly. With Amplitude, and I think what happened is some of the calls that we wanted to make were rather specific. So we were able to just use the HTTP request node rather quickly for that. Omar, can you remember any other nodes that we didn't have coverage for? I think the others we did.
No, I think we got coverage for all of the services, but maybe for very specific situations when we wanted to query something that the node did not support, we could use the HTTP request node. But most of the times, the nodes covered all what we needed already.
Yep.
Cool. And one other question I see is, how is Retool fetching the information? Are you making calls to these APIs separately, or is an N8N workflow doing that?
Cool. So we are using NA10. We're using multiple workflows in NA10. So we have a centralized credential system. So all the credentials for paddle, for customer IO, for segment, for any services that we want, the credentials are all centralized inside NA10. And we're using NA10 workflows to fetch this information and return it to Retool. We decided to use this, even though Retool might be able to connect to all of these services. In some situations, we wanted to do filtering of data. We wanted to, for example, rename fields, merge data, add some business logic, for example, transform something, or fetch some information from another source and merge it together. So it made a lot more sense to use NA10 as our API layer. So this was one of the main advantages for me, from an engineering perspective, to have NA10 in there, because I was able to do those sort of data manipulations.
Really cool.
Yeah. And from my perspective on that note, I think what's really nice is that if you're using NA10 in your organization for other workflow cases, is that Retool now really is not a vector, right? It has the API keys that Retool has is for the specific N8N workflows, not for those destination apps themselves. So then when you're thinking about compliance and security, okay, our N8N instance has to be secure. If you're on an N8N cloud, you don't really have to worry about that. But you don't have these keys drifting in all these different tools as you build out sort of these Hackmation style dashboards.
I see a message from Ricardo, who's one of our colleagues who works on integrations, and he says, "I could have given you coverage. You just needed to ask."
That's very true. I think Ricardo has sometimes made a note in I don't want to say a few hours because I might insult him. I think it might be some under an hour there.
I'll be relying on that for the next notes. Awesome. Okay, what about we showcase some of the workflows? What do you think?
Let's do it.
And so what is powering? So these are being powered by N8N, and I think you used N8N Cloud, right? I like it, very meta. Exactly. So you're using N8N Cloud to power the N8N Cloud user dashboard. That's cool.
Absolutely. There's actually a lot of very, very meta things like that happening in N8N. There's a lot of cases where we're eating our own dog food.
Amazing. Cool. So shall we take a look at the workflows or take a peek under the hood?
Let's do it. Omar, do you want to share your screen?
Definitely. Can you put me online tonight?
There you go. You're live.
Okay. Cool. Well, so this is the first workflow. This one powers that dashboard screen that you saw at first, the one that displays all of the users that we have in our account, in our instances. So the way it works is that we have a webhook node, so it exposes a URL. And one cool thing that I would like to mention is that when Max mentioned about security, it took us less than 10 minutes to create authentication and protect this with safe passwords, So it was really easy and quick to implement. So we have a secure instance, and this one is querying our database. So if we execute this workflow here manually, we can see, never mind, it would be waiting for a webhook call. I thought it would be just execute from the start node. But anyway, what it does is that it queries our database, it gets the user information, and it returns that from our HTTP request, So this powers that home screen that we saw while Max was showcasing the Retool app. And then we have a few other workflows. So when you click the button to view the details, it's those other 3 workflows that we have in here. So this one gets the user Zendesk information. So same thing, we have a webhook node, which answers, it's a /Zendesk ID. It queries Zendesk for the user information, so it searches for a user. And if you have a look, we are querying based on the user email. So this endpoint receives the user email, searches for them on Zendesk, and returns some information to the front end with the user Zendesk ID. So we can click that button, if you remember on the details page that we have, see user and Zendesk. So based on the email, we can actually jump to Zendesk user ID. So we can jump to the Zendesk panel and see the user information, his open tickets, interact with him, and this sort of things. So this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have this information. So this is one of the reasons we decided to use N8N, because in order to find a user, I only had in hand the email. I don't have the Zendesk user ID. So I needed this information to make this call. So this is one of the benefits, that not just adding secure information and keeping all the credentials in a single place, is that we're able to make all of these transformations and querying to other services,
Yeah. And from my perspective as well, so Omar was able to whip that up in a few seconds, but if I ever wanted to, maybe I have an extra hour free on a Friday, I want to optimize this. It's in a no-code tool. I have the credentials. I can log in and I can tweak it, right? I can say, let's also grab some data from this place. And so that's, I think, a really great aspect of that is the discoverability of these workflows, and for someone else that's not a developer to be able to come in and tweak them.
Yeah, so it's very interesting the way you can work with data in N8N. So you have data from multiple sources. You can merge this data, combine it, filter it. That's a degree of flexibility that only N8N provides. So if you're using Retool, it's great for presentation, but having this degree of aggregation and data handling is not exactly Retool's focus. It's more about presenting a very good interface. So, we're using the best from both tools, to have a good final result.
Yeah. And one thing I realized in Retool, I think they expect that you're getting your hands a bit dirty with coding, for example. So I think some of these calls might be possible in Retool if you're just writing vanilla JavaScript. One thing that was nice here is that Omar can create it, but I can go in and understand what he's doing, right, and tweak it with no code or very minimal tweaks to existing code, which is usually a lot easier to do than having a blank canvas, right, and saying, okay, let's open Stack Overflow.
Let's start a Control-C, Control-V thing.
Exactly.
I see a question. Sure. I see a question from Harshad that says, was there a particular reason that you have separate workflows? Can they be combined in a single workflow?
Sure. Max, I think you have mentioned that in the beginning. So we've thought about building one huge monolithic workflow in the beginning. But the cool thing about Retool is that you can create separate panels, so separate tables of information, and each one of them can have one separate source. So the cool thing was that even if, like, let's say one of the services is offline or is having like latency issues, it wouldn't impact the others. So that's the main reason why we decided to create separate workflows. And also, one side benefit that you can have in this situation is that if you want to add information to only one of the panels, it's a lot easier. So they're not all tied together. So it adds some more flexibility. But yes, you can definitely combine all of this information to return a single request. So in a single request, you can return all the necessary data to feed a single page. But I think the benefits of separating them is a very good trade-off. You'd have to maintain multiple different workflows, but at the same time, you gain a lot of flexibility. Data will be displayed as soon as it's available, because if you're using a monolithic workflow, you'd have to get all the data first, wait for all of the data to be fetched, manage that data, work on it, and then return it. So that's the reason we decided to create multiple workflows for this.
It's actually a very poignant question, because moments before this live stream, we were giving it a test. Everything had been working an hour before that. And Amplitude, the workflow was erroring out. We took a look, and it happened that Amplitude in that particular moment was taking about 20 to sometimes 30 seconds to return the call. So by designing in that way, everything else loaded on the page, and also everything else didn't break. So that's another great example, because even large tools do sometimes have a latency issue or an outage, and so you don't have to be sort of dependent on that.
Cool.
Exactly.
I see Harshal replies, makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I can see how breaking them into small chunks can be useful. And I also see Teflon saying, starting to create more sub-workflows for common functions that are being called by other workflows, way easier to work with later.
Absolutely.
And yeah, he also adds, I was expecting to see a lot more custom function nodes. Very impressive. And he says,
I have a huge tendency. Exactly. I have a huge tendency to use the function nodes, because as a developer, I would just like to write some JavaScript code and solve my problems. But it was very cool because I did not need to do this, and I could easily contain my urge to write code simply using the set nodes. So it was really easy to create all of this necessary information. Because let's say, for the example, this workflow that I'm showing right now, we get some information from the database, and based on the information we got from the database, we query paddle, and it's inactive here because we don't have a sandbox account for this service. So this is the only reason, but it's working, you can believe me. And we're getting this information from paddle based on the subscription ID. So this is something we get from the database, the subscription ID. So if I'm not mistaken, we're querying based on the email. So we get the email.
The user ID.
Oh, user ID. Okay. So we get the user ID from the webhook. This one gets from the database. We get the subscription ID. We query it to paddle, and then we merge this information together to output, for example, user ID, paddle info, subscription ID, plan ID, and plenty of further information about this user in a single endpoint. So this is one example of merging information from multiple sources. In this case, I'm getting information from our database and paddle, but you could also join other services here and have a very complex workflow.
I think what's another cool thing that we're seeing here with N8N is at the beginning of this conversation, Tanya, you asked us, how long would this take if we had to build it from scratch, right? So I think when you're thinking about from scratch, very often you talk about the initial build, but I think the much more important question is the maintenance and when you want to make a change. Because initial build, you know, I would take a long build if the maintenance, if there was a world where there's zero maintenance once it's built, I would take a long build 9 times out of 10. But the problem is when you want to make a small change, if this was set up for the production database and we wanted to do this presentation, realistically, we probably would not have been able to do that. Versus in that case, what you saw with the paddle workflow, we deactivated the workflow, rerouted through there, and so some of the data that was sent was empty, but nothing broke. It's just the paddle portion of the views didn't have that data populated, but everything else worked, and that took about 5 seconds. We clicked pause and rerouted and saved. Right.
Definitely.
So let's take data as well, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
I see Chris has commented what we actually can do is build reusable workflows for some common use cases. And I know Max is working on some of those things, right? Documenting these recipes, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's one thing we're identifying with N8N right now is that, you know, usually the thing that you want to do with N8N is rather specific, and that's amazing. That's what makes tools like N8N great. It's because you can go do that specific thing. But we're working on these sorts of conceptual patterns on best practices, right? Like how to interact with a spreadsheet or how to loop over something, right? Because there are some best practices around doing that.
Right. And I see Teflon commenting, I so love the HTTP request node. We do as well.
I would say
definitely.
The HTTP requests in the webhook, I wouldn't even say unsung heroes. I think they're rather well sung in the N8N community. But if we don't have a native node yet for something that you're looking to do, you essentially almost always unblock by being able to use those two.
Yeah, having the HTTP request node and the function node allows you to basically do anything because you have the whole power in your hands. And just remember, with great power comes great responsibility. You have to know how to use those. But they're very flexible in anything you can do. So this is an example where we had an issue with the amplitude node. Their API was taking a bit longer to respond. So we simply switched to using the HTTP request node, and we bypassed this problem. So this is a case where we receive the HTTP request to get the user data from Amplitude. We query the user search API first based on the username, and then after getting the user ID and his data, we query again the Amplitude API. Oops, Mac is stuck in here. I'm sorry. Okay, so we get the user activity now, and based on the user activity, we get all the user activity based on the user ID that we received in the first request, and we return all of that to our front end, basically renaming some of the fields, filtering some data out. So that's one very cool thing with this flag keep only set. So only the information that we are actually mapping here will be returned from this workflow. So it's a very easy way to build an API, and it's very flexible.
And I would say what I found from production workflows, what's really nice, like so what's happening here, right, with the webhook node is we have a setting where return the data of the last node, which is great because usually what you're doing is you're doing a multi-step workflow, and when you've got the data ready, you want to return it somewhere, right? So it's usually rather intuitive. But I always recommend, even if the last node, let's say we did have the Amplitude node and Amplitude returns the data exactly how you want it, do have a set node at the end so that you have a standardized response back. Because now, when we have that set node and we have an agreed upon sort of structure for the data being returned, we can change what's happening in the middle and not break Retool if we want to add some stuff on top, right? So definitely recommend that pattern of sort of having a set node, or if you're doing a very creating a very complicated object. You can also do it with a function node, but to have a node at the end where you're deliberately sort of creating that structure very intentionally.
Yeah, it's important to know that we built this remotely. So I was at my place and Max was at his place. And the only thing we coordinated was that, okay, I'll be returning to you an array of objects with properties X, Y, and Z. And then Max was already working on this. So he mentioned this in the beginning, and I can stress how useful and important it was, because just set up the protocol and he was able to work on the interface, and I was able to work on the API separately. And once we combined those together, ta-da, live data with absolutely no issues, So establishing this protocol is really great.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, yeah, if you're planning, or if you're looking to do something like this, if you have the opportunity, let's say you're in product, and you have the opportunity to collaborate with someone from engineering, it can be a very amazing combination. Because some of the things that Omar did in the N8N or app, I probably could have done, but for example, the SQL query, I would be on Stack Overflow for 45 minutes, right, figuring out the query, where for Omar, he can just type it out. Same thing on the product side, Retool is very intuitive. Omar could have put the components together, but I'm able to do that much faster. What the common language there is really very little planning. It's a very simple JSON object. So do that level of planning, have a high level understanding of what you want to achieve. And then I would say, don't overspec it too much from there, because what's really nice about if you're doing this in a hackathon way is meet often and try and fail and test often. Sort of that whole mantra there is going to be helpful.
Definitely.
Because I think we achieved a lot more than we ever thought we would in one day by sort of having that approach.
Yeah, cool. and that's a repeating. I'm sorry that I was just going to mention that it's a repeating pattern, because for the second Hackmation, the one that I built, that German learning application, it was pretty much the same. It's not like don't spec it too much. We did not spec almost at all. We just knew that we wanted something that would help us learn German. And believe it or not, I'm using it every day. I'm checking for new words. I'm getting new words on Mattermost. So if you haven't watched the other live stream, I recommend you doing so, because it was a very great experience on building a language learning app that is not intrusive in a day. And it was very cool.
Yeah. And I see there's a question Max mentioned, and that they're using, I think he said N8N Cloud, which filters out the links. Quick question, how do you get started with N8N Cloud? Max, you had a special something for people wanting to try out N8N Cloud.
Sure. Right? So the first place you want to go to is to n8ncloud.com. It's going to be a big old start free trial button. You're going to want to click on that. And then when you're signing up, we have created this coupon. Nice shirt, Omar. And so with this coupon, you type it in. This is going to be, when you're entering your details, there'll be a button for the coupon. You'll get 15 euros off any plan. So you'll get 30 days free, and then on the first sort of billing cycle, you get 15 euros off. So basically 60 days to check out N8N Cloud and launch an internal dashboard. So hopefully in those 60 days is going to save you a lot of time.
Definitely.
Awesome. And yeah, I see some other comments. Teflon says it would actually be nice to have the keep only set button on other nodes as well. And Jay says, thanks guys, have to check out and get back to earning some dollars.
I appreciate that. Well, Teflon, I'd love to have a chat with you about that and see what that might look like. And Jay, totally understand. But hopefully the coupon that's down there can help offset that.
Cool. Yeah. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to send them along in the chat, and we'd be really happy to answer. And while we do that, Max, what other tools would you envision sort of using N8N with when building sort of apps that have a backend that is powered by N8N along with a front end? What sort of tools do you go to?
Sure. So if it's an internal tool, there are I've heard of AppSmith and a few others, but I think really the important thing here is the maturity in the product, because what you don't want to do is you get 90% done and you're like, oh, well, there's not coverage for that component. What am I going to do, right? So I would say so far, I'm not an expert on the internal tool space, but Retool is just, I'm not getting a check from them or anything. It was just from this project, we used it. And what's really nice about it is if you're using it just for internal teams, you can essentially stay in the free plan, because how it works is when you sign up for an account, it'll automatically add you to the organization if you have the same domain name. So great for discoverability and that sort of thing. So anyone at N8N could use this dashboard. Now, if you want to start locking it down or something, I think they have some rather affordable plans for that. So internal, I would say check out Retool. And if you know some other great ones, please do reach out on Twitter. I'd love to check those out too. When it comes to user-facing tools, this is where I think there's a cornucopia of options. I've used Bubble myself. I'm a pretty big fan of Bubble, especially if you're trying to do a micro SaaS or anything like that. I really don't think you can go wrong with Bubble. They do have a sort of a workflows concept, but I would follow a similar pattern for very basic things where you're doing small automations within the Bubble ecosystem. I would use their native one. And then for more complex things that maybe you're pulling in Zendesk or something like that, I would look to use N8N because you can set up Bubble to consume that very easily. And we have a Bubble node now, so you can do that with no code. From there, I'm not as aware of the different options that we have in the sort of native app space, but I do know there's a lot of competition in that space and whatnot. But so I would say default, if it's a micro SaaS and you're thinking about web, Bubble, internal app, Retool. If you out there have any other suggestions, or you think, no, Max, you haven't heard about this amazing tool, I love checking out new tools. I think a lot of us here at N8N do, so please do reach out. I'd love to hear about them.
And what's the best way to reach out to you folks? Max, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter. It's at MaxTKatz. I can spell that. That's MaxTKACZ. And then if you're on the N8N community forums, I believe it's at MaxT. So I'm active on there. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, I love talking with users. I love talking, even if you're not using N8N right now and you're interested in it, especially maybe, you're in product and you're thinking, how do I apply this? Mention me with your problem. Let's see if there's a solution. I love collaborating on that and basically saving time with automation.
Awesome. I see another question from Harshit, which says, does the coupon come with a t-shirt?
Not yet, but we're working on it.
Cool. I see from Teflon, are you guys working on any new core nodes that we could be looking for in the near future?
At this exact moment, I don't think so, but there are a few ones that have been on discussion. For example, one that helps you transform data more easily. So think of the set node with steroids, for example, allowing you to trim data and maybe parse it, convert it to something else. This is something that has been requested by the community, but it's not that it's extremely complex to do, but the thing is we wanted to make it really intuitive and powerful, and this is why we're just backing this. So this is one of like the core nodes that we would really love to do. For now, most of these issues can be solved using a function node. But it requires some coding. So we're trying to understand what are the use cases, the best ones, map them, and understand how to build this as a node. Because it's hard to make this really intuitive. Think of the merge node, if you have used this one before. It's got a very big amount of options of what you can do with this one. So it's very powerful, but at the same time, it might feel a bit overwhelming. And we're trying to maybe avoid this. How to reach this good balance between power and complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited about those nodes. I think it's going to open up N8N, not really open up N8N to more people, but open up the sophisticated and powerful workflows that more of us can do if we're not sort of native coders. I consider myself a script kiddie, so I personally am very excited for those nodes. On that note, if you think there's a tool that has some amazing UI or patterns for manipulating JSON, working with it, iterating, looping, or anything, feel free to DM me or mention me on Twitter. I'm always checking out patterns.
Definitely.
Cool. I see Teflon says anything around data transformation would be awesome. And Omar, by the way, what's the best way to reach out to you?
I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not a power user. I'm mostly like the reader type. It's at Crimble, and the community forum is the same. So tonight just added to the live stream. So, and on the community forums, you can also reach me. Those are the main places that I've been using the most. And also, well, actually, email Omar@ntnio. Feel free to also reach me out.
Awesome. All right, folks, anything else? Max, Omar, are we missing anything?
Well, I just wanted to take a chance to say thanks a lot, Tanya, for organizing this. This has been, I think this is one of the most exciting projects for me personally so far that's come out of these Hackmations, simply because of what a lifesaver it is. I use this dashboard every single day. Well, I'd say every single business day. On the weekends, I'm trying to relax. But so I would say, yeah, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to show this. And if this helps one individual out there, inspire them to go try out these tools and to save some time, and beyond that, I think get some delight in the day because you're not doing menial stuff anymore. Then it's job well done. So thanks for putting it together.
Yeah, thanks both of you for joining. This was really, really amazing. And also thank you all for tuning in. It was great to showcase like what we have been doing on in our internal Hackmations. And we hope that you organize Hackmations at your organization too. And if you do plan to do so, if you need any support, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be really happy to help. Meanwhile, thank you so much. And Omar and I would be coming online next week and we'd be chatting about how scaling works in n8n. So this is a relatively newer features, I think since 108 version. Is that correct, Omar?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And he'd be teaching us how we can scale n8n. So stay tuned for that. We'll have an announcement for that very soon. So thank you, everyone. And if you have any other suggestions for topics you'd like for us to cover, we would be really, really happy to arrange something for that. So thank you so much and have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you, people.
Thanks all.
Ciao.
Bye.